So this is the plant that actually has toxic chemicals in it. And in fact, if you go onto the U.S. CPA site, ASCPA, it's anyway the Wildlife Protection for Pets. They say do not grow this in your yard.
What was that called, ma'am?
It's called staggerweed. And it's called staggerweed because it actually will make browsers sick to the point that they stagger and may die. I think if you look it up, it's Rusty Lyonia also. And if you look closely, this is in the same family as blueberries, and you'll notice the little bud here. If you, as we leave, if you come up close, it looks very much like a blueberry bud. But also look at the leaves. Look closely at the leaves. Rusty Lyonia is another name for this, and you will notice what looks like rust on this plant.
Yeah.
In fact, it's little tiny, tiny hairs, almost microscopic. And this is the plant's way, another way of grabbing moisture, believe it or not. Because without with all this open canopy up here, when the sun goes down, it gets cold here much faster than in other areas. And so condensation develops. And the condensation, the hairs give the plant more of an area for the condensation to collect. And then the condensation will just run down, and we'll see it on some of the other plants, and run down to the roots.
Somebody asked about this over here. This larger tree over here is a strangle fig. And you can see it's full of fruit. See little berries out there? And it's really a good food source for wildlife. It has a little fig on it. It looks just like your regular fig that you buy in the grocery store, only smaller. And they can grow, you see them a lot growing wrapped around, usually a sable palm, but they can grow independently like that also.
It's true, and they're actually a very important food source because they put on figs, the fruit, 3 times a year, which is kind of unusual. So for birds, this is a very important food source. As small as it is, it's yeah.
Wow. Is that figs that's all along the branches?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that wild?
Prolific.
Is
Yeah,
this
okay.
about as large as it gets, Paul?
Out on Fort Myers Beach at the Mound House, it's probably 5 times bigger than that.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a good point. You're right. I think even up at the Calusa, even up at Randall Research, they have bigger ones. Good point.
Is it?
I hadn't thought about that.
Are those standalone? I've only seen them wrapped around other trees.
Well, they probably started out wrapped around other trees. And what happens is they shade out whatever the host tree is, and then the host tree dies. They start out actually as epiphytes. The seed will land generally in a sable palm. That's probably why there was probably another sable palm over here at some point. And it actually sends down the roots to the ground. So it's kind of just for the first part of its life, just collecting water and nutrients out of the air. And then finally, when it lands and sets down roots, then it will start its process of wrapping around the tree. Here briefly, because this allows you to see with a saw palmetto how the trunk is sent horizontally along the ground, so that that is really a terrific protectant for the saw palmetto, so that it isn't up high in winds or in fire. And I do know that this trunk grows 1.2 centimeters a year. I had to do something as in the Master Naturalist class that that used that particular figure. So anyway, that's how that grows.
So if you were to walk in there, I mean, say you could walk in there, then
Yeah.
it'd be just a web of these under your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're all just actually the exit. Okay.
They're the trunks.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
I never realized these. So what we were looking at was the end, the bloom, or whatever you want to call it. Okay.
These are. That's right.
Yeah,
These
I
are
never
the end.
realized that.
Although I'll tell you something, they pop up in the middle of the trunk too. They're not necessarily just the end.
Oh, all right. So they're also
Yes.
junctions along there. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
This pretty little plant right here is wild pennyroyal. I encourage you to rub your fingers on the branch along the little leaves.
I'm good.
It has a delightful scent. It's sort of minty. And this is another plant that is using chemicals in order to keep away browsers.
What was that called?
Wild pennyroyal.
Wow.
Very common here, and very common in these in flatwoods like this. And these little plants right here are yellow-eyed grass. We're going to see more of this, I think. For example, of the yellow-eyed grass.
Oh, yeah.
Very pretty little plant. It's a pipewort. This is bog buttons or hat pins. It's a pipewort. Isn't it pretty?
Yeah.
Ron and I saw a ton of this just a couple of days ago. And I think we're going to see more of it. But it's just a real pretty little plant that likes some amount of moisture. So I'm guessing that that's why it's chosen to be along the path, because the sand is a little bit more compacted here, and so it would hold the moisture.
Nice.
And Elijah has mentioned that he has a slash pine, and you know, they're not going to allow a burn, a managed burn in his yard. We can think of managed burns as sort of being us in our backyards, picking up the leaves, you know, and mulching them and then laying them down again for the ash, that what would be ash out of the fire, but then the mulched up leaves to release natural nutrients and all back into the soil. But it keeps the burnable stuff down so that we don't, you know, create a conflagration. These holes, they are made by armadillos. Armadillos go after insects, and so they're the ones who are making little holes here. And for anybody who didn't hear, boy, we're seeing a lot of these now. The bog buttons and the hat pins. And you can tell by the name, bog, it likes moisture. So that's why you're seeing it here, because it happens to have a little bit more moisture in this area.
Are the armadillos just digging in to get insects?
Insects.
They don't live down there?
No,
tunnel
they
around?
don't.
Okay.
Just to feed. Exactly.
They live
Yeah.
in the drain.
They can detect, and so they just go for them.
How do we know where there's gopher turtles? I've always wondered, how do people say, oh, that property has gopher tortoises, but
Well-
I never know how people know. I've seen burrows.
Well, we're going to see them around the other side.
Oh, good.
So, and in fact, we're going to see a bunch of them. They like another area that we're going into because it's had more frequent burns, and that's better for the gopher tortoise. And I'll explain that when we actually get there. We're going to look at this tree because this is a more mature than you saw before, a more mature longleaf pine tree. And one of the ways that you can tell if you are just looking from down here, up there, is that the pine cones are much longer on a longleaf pine than they are on a slash pine. Longleaf pine cones will get to be between 7 and 9 inches long, whereas the pine cones of a slash are about half that size. So this is a longleaf pine. Yeah.
The one with the white band on
The
it?
one with a white band on it. Exactly.
And then the next
And we're
one
looking
beyond
up,
is not.
what we're looking up at is the pine cones.
Yeah, also another thing is longleaf pine has 3 needles per bunch, and mostly, now sometimes it'll be 2, but about 80% of them will be 3, whereas the slash pine is 2. So that's a good way to tell it. A little later on, you'll be able to see the buds will come out. They'll be real silvery. It's kind of hard to tell by the actual length of the needle. From the ground.
True. It's true, but I didn't mention. I forgot to mention that the needles themselves
Yep.
are like 12 inches long, as opposed to slash, which are shorter.
That is amazing.
You can see this is slash. This is long.
So everything is long.
Everything is long. That's right. That's right. Exactly. Since we stopped here too, I'm gonna point this out. This is the fluorescence of a saw palmetto. Saw palmettos do get berries on them, and it's an important wildlife food source. There was a fellow named Jonathan Dickinson who back in the 1700s was stranded in Florida. His ship had shipwrecked, and his whole family, they were trying to get from Florida back up to their home in Georgia. And so he ate a lot of saw palmetto because he was essentially hunting and gathering on his way back. And you'd think that if that's all he had to depend on, you know, he might grow to kind of like the stuff. But he said that it tasted like rotten cheese steeped in tobacco.
Whoa.
Not so great.
What was he
But,
eating?
the berries.
Oh, the berries.
He was eating the berries. But they were actually a very important food source for early Americans, both the Native Americans and the pioneers, because if you are sort of a hunter-gatherer, you have a hard time finding good fats to incorporate into your diet. And these berries have naturally occurring triglycerides. Now the irony is that nowadays we try to lower our triglycerides, but in a hunter-gatherer society, they had to actually search for those. So
And this is also
We're
the
too
plant
sedentary.
that
yes,
they use as a natural medication for enlarged prostate. You know, you see the advertisements for saw palmetto. They use
That's
those
the berries?
The berries.
yeah, it is.
What do they use it for?
Prostate problem. Prostate problem.
And that's what